The oldest member of the Concordat spoke last, because he had learned that the young do not hear a warning until they have already stopped listening. His name was Warspeaker. He was an archivist, not a warrior, and in the great tiered chamber of the High Council, he stood among admirals and arbiters, like a dry reed among blades. He had spent 300 years reading the records of species that had refused to kneel. Most of those records ended the same way: a refusal, a punishment, a colony gone, quiet, a people folded neatly into the Concordat, like a page into a book. He knew that shape. He had catalogued it 40 times. This time the shape was wrong, and he was the only one in the room who felt it. "I have read everything we hold on Earth," he said. His voice was not loud. He did not make it loud. "It is not much. They came out of their own system slowly. They did not conquer their neighbors because they had none. They build, and they repair, and they do not boast. And in 400 years of watching them, we have never once seen them frightened." High Arbiter Selvath did not look up from the tally before her. She was Valen, like most of the council, tall and pale and certain, and certainty sat on her, the way armor sits on someone who has never been struck. "A species that has never been frightened," she said, "is a species that has never met us." There was a soft sound in the chamber, not laughter. The Valen did not laugh in council. It was the sound of many people deciding all at once that the old man had finished being interesting, or said Voshkar. "It is a species that has already survived the thing that would frighten it, and has nothing left to fear from us." Selvath set down her stylus. She was patient with him, the way one is patient with a clock that runs slow. "We have brought 40 worlds into accord," she said. 40. Some knelt at the first word. Some needed to be shown the cost. Not one of them in the end had an answer for this. She let the word sit. This, the whole weight of the Concordat behind a single flat syllable. "Earth will be the 41st. They have no answer for this either. They will learn the number, and they will kneel to it, as all the others did." Voshkar looked at her for a long moment. Then he did the only thing an archivist can do in a room full of people who have stopped listening. He remembered it so that later someone would have a record of who had spoken and what had been ignored. The vote was not close. Far from that chamber on a world, the Concordat had marked in its charts as a target, and nothing more. A woman read the ultimatum twice, and then did not read it a third time. Her name was Ada Reyes. She commanded a ship the humans had chosen, with their strange flat humor, to call long patience. She was not tall. She did not carry herself like a threat. She had the kind of stillness that people mistake for calm, right up until they understand it is something older than calm. She read the demand for Earth surrender, and the deadline attached to it, and the list of what would happen if the deadline passed, and her expression did not change at all. Around her, the room waited. Officers, analysts, a young man at the far console with a mug going cold at his elbow. They waited for anger or fear or the long, grim speech that the moment seemed to ask for. Reyes gave them none of it. She looked at the deadline. She looked at the number of hours it left, and she said very quietly to no one in particular, "Start the clock." That was all. Start the clock. 2 words in a low voice, and the young man at the far console reached over without being told and touched something, and somewhere a count began that would not stop for a long time. If the Concordat had heard those 2 words, they would not have understood them. That was the trouble with the Concordat. They understood threats. A threat is a thing you can measure. So many ships, so many worlds, so many hours, until the fire. They had built an empire on the arithmetic of fear, and they were very good at it. But they had no entry in any of their records for a species that answered a threat by starting a clock and saying nothing else at all. The fleet that would carry the Concordat's certainty to Earth was placed under a single commander, and the choice was not an accident. Warspeaker Tamarako had reduced 4 worlds to accord without losing a ship. He was Valen, broad and scarred, and he believed in numbers, the way other people believe in gods. He did not hate the humans. He did not think about them enough to hate them. To him they were a quantity, and quantities did not require hatred. They required force applied correctly in the right amount at the right time, and Tamarako had never in his career applied it incorrectly. He was given 600 ships. He asked for 400, and took 600 because the council insisted, and he thought privately that 400 too many was a poor way to begin. Overwhelming force teaches nothing. A world that surrenders to 600 ships learns only that it was outnumbered. A world that surrenders to 200 learns that it was outmatched. And that lesson holds. But he took the 600 because the council wished the number to be enormous, and enormous numbers were what the council understood. He set his course for Earth, and as his ships aligned, and the long dark opened before them, a message came in from the target world. His communications officer flagged it as the human response to the ultimatum, and Tamara Ko felt the small familiar satisfaction of a thing going. As expected, they had answered before he had even arrived. Good. Fear was efficient. It saved ships. He opened the message expecting terms, a plea perhaps, a negotiation, a stalling an offer of tribute, the words he had read in the surrender records of 4 other worlds. He expected at the very least sentences. There were no sentences. The human response to the surrender of their entire species was a single line of characters, a string of coordinates precise to a decimal, his instruments strained to render, and beside the coordinates, one entry number, as if it had been drawn from some vast running list. Entry 2906. Nothing else. No demand. No refusal. No name. A place and a number and a small mark at the end that his translators rendered, after some effort, as a period. A full stop. The humans had ended their reply, the way one ends a sentence. One is quite finished with. Tamara Ko read it 3 times. He was not a man who read things 3 times. He called his intelligence officer and asked what the coordinates were. The answer took longer than it should have, and when it came, the officer's voice had changed in a way Ko did not like. The coordinates, the officer said, resolved to a location deep inside Concordat space, not human space. Theirs, a system in the charts, quiet, unremarkable, held under a designation. The officer would need clearance to fully read, and the number Tamara Ko said, 2906. What does it count? The officer did not know. Nobody aboard knew. It was not a fleet designation. It was not a date in any calendar the Concordat used. It was not a coordinate index or a ship registry or a casualty figure. It was simply a number large and specific, attached to a place inside his own empire. Sent back, in answer to a demand for the surrender of a world. Tamara Ko sat with that for a while, in the quiet of his command deck, 600 ships arrayed behind him, and the long dark ahead. He was a man who believed in numbers, and for the first time in his career, he was holding one he could not read. He gave the order to continue to Earth. His voice was steady. It stayed steady, but he did not delete the message. He left it open on his screen, the coordinates and the number and the small final mark, and now and then through the crossing, he found himself looking at it again. The crossing to Earth took 11 days, and Tamara Ko spent most of them learning that he could not find the enemy. This should not have been difficult. A world under threat gathers its ships. It pulls its fleets home, closes its formations, lets the attacker count the defense, and be afraid of it or not. That was the dance. Ko had led it 4 times. You approached. You saw what they had. They saw what you had. And the arithmetic did the rest. He had come to Earth, expecting to read a defense, the way he read everything, as a quantity. There was no quantity to read. His long scans returned Earth itself blue, and turning and unbothered. They returned traffic between the human world's freighters and haulers, and the slow patient commerce of a species that built more than it fought. They returned no war fleet, not a small one, not a hidden one. His officers ran the sweep again and again, widening the arc each time, and each time the answer came back the same, and the answer was nothing. They have pulled back to defend something his fleet master offered, a core system, a shipyard. We have not charted. Then chart it, Ko said. They tried. What they found instead was that the humans had been to a great many places the Concordat had assumed were their own, not fleets. Trace, a maintenance beacon on a Concordat relay that logged a human vessel passing through quietly years ago, and leaving a repair signature on a derelict at the edge of a concordat system, a human ship that had done something, and gone harming nothing. Small things. A pattern of small things scattered across the Empire's own charts, like the marks a reader leaves in the margins of a book that is not his. It was not a fleet. Ko could not make it be a fleet, and so his instruments told him it was harmless, and something older than his instruments told him it was not. He did not report the traces to the council. He told himself it was because they were nothing. In truth, it was because he did not yet have a number for them, and Tamarack Ko did not like to speak of things he could not count. On the third day, the number came again. It arrived the way the first had unbidden tagged by his systems, as originating somewhere in the human worlds and addressed to no one. There was no message wrapped around it. A single line, a place deep in Concordat, space again, a different place, this time, and beside it, an entry. Entry 2911, 5 higher than the last. Ko sat with that. 5 higher in 3 days. He did not know what he was counting the rise of. He knew only that it was rising, and that whoever was sending it wanted him to see that it was rising, and that this was somehow worse than a threat, because a threat at least told you what it wanted. He asked his intelligence officer again what the numbers counted. The officer who had not slept said he had a theory he did not like. Ko told him to say it anyway. I think the officer said slowly, "It is a list of some things, and I think the list is long, and I think they are showing us that they are still adding to it." That was all he had. Ko told him to keep working and cut the channel, and looked at the blue turning world in his forward screen, the world that had sent him a place and a period, and would not tell him what either meant. Far below, on a world that was not Earth, and not part of any war, a woman named Priya Okonkwo was checking the seed vault as she did every morning. Because the vault did not check itself, Halden's Reach was not a fortress. It was barely a colony, 9,000 people, a thin ring of farmland turned toward a pale sun, and at its center, the thing they had all quietly organized their lives around, which was the vault, row upon row of sealed drawers, climate held, each one labeled in Priya's own hand because she did not trust the printed labels to survive the century, and the drawers were meant to survive the century. Grain from 100 lost places, fruit that grew nowhere anymore. The whole inheritance of a people who had learned a long time ago that the way you keep a thing forever is to make many quiet copies of it and hide them where the fire will not reach. Priya was 47. She had a husband named Daniel and 2 children who were at that hour arguing about something small and eternal at the breakfast table. She had been the keeper of the Halden vault for 19 years. She knew the sound each drawer made when it seated home. She wrote the labels by hand because her mother had written labels by hand, and because a machine cannot love a thing, and the seeds needed loving as much as they needed cold. She did not know a fleet of 600 ships was 11 days from Earth. Halden's Reach was not Earth. Halden's Reach had never threatened anyone. She checked the drawers and marked the log in her own careful hand and went to referee the argument at the breakfast table. And the morning was ordinary, in the way that only the last ordinary morning ever is. Remember her face. The story will need it later. In the High Council chamber, High Arbiter Selvoth was reviewing Tamarack Ko's reports and finding them thin. He had reached the target. Good. He had found no defending fleet. She read that as fear, because that was the only shape her records had for it. A people who did not muster a defense were a people already deciding to kneel. She had seen it 30 times. The silence before the surrender was always the loudest part. Her aide mentioned carefully the numbers, the entries, the places inside Concordat space that the humans kept naming and would not explain. Selvoth waved it away. Noise, she said. A frightened species does strange things. In its last days, they name our worlds because they wish us to think they can reach them. It is a bluff. It is the oldest bluff there is. She returned to her tally satisfied. They have no answer for this. They are pretending to have one. That is not the same thing. They have no answer for this. She had said it in council and she said it now, and it was a comfortable thing to say. And she said it the way people say the things that have always been true, which is to say without looking to check whether they still were. Back aboard the flagship Tamarack, Ko had made a decision, and he did not like it, and he made it anyway. 11 days of silence. No fleet, no terms, no fear. He could read only a rising number and a scattering of margin notes across his own empire. His officers were beginning to look at the blue world differently. Certainty is a thing. A fleet catches from its commander, and Ko could feel his own, leaking away, and a leaking commander loses worlds. He needed to restore the arithmetic. He needed to remind this silent species what the numbers meant. Not against Earth. Not yet. Earth was the prize, and you did not damage the prize. But near it, a demonstration, a single strike, on a soft target, precise and total, so the humans would understand the shape of what was coming, and answer at last with the fear he could read. His intelligence officer laid the human systems before him. One was flagged as a probable military installation, its long rows of climate-held structures, and its heavy central facility reading to Concordat, instruments as a hardened depot, a supply base. A legitimate target. Ko studied it. 9,000 personnel. A defensibly objective. A message that could not be missed. This one, Tamarack Ko said, and put his hand on the name in the chart, Halden's Reach. His officer hesitated for the smallest moment. The scans are not certain. It is military. It is military enough, Ko said. It will do. And so the order went out correct, and measured exactly the right amount of force, applied at exactly the right time from a commander who had never once applied it wrongly. 6 ships peeled from the formation and turned toward a colony of farmers who had never threatened anyone, toward a woman who wrote her labels by hand toward the last ordinary morning, and began to burn their engines hot for the crossing. The number, when it came that evening, was 2,912. One higher. Just one. As if the list had turned to watch what he was about to do, and made a small note, and waited. The 6 ships came out of the dark above Halden's Reach, at the hour the colony called morning, and they did what they had been sent to do correctly and completely, and it took less time than the crossing had. Priya Okonkwo was in the vault. When the ground first moved, she did not run for the shelters, though there was a shelter and there was time a little. She ran the other way, deeper in toward the drawers, and she began to do the thing she had spent 19 years preparing to do without ever letting herself believe she would have to. She pulled the core archive, the oldest copies, the ones that existed nowhere else, the seeds 100 worlds had sent to Halden, precisely because Halden was quiet and far, and no one would ever think to burn it. She sealed them into the deep hold, the one built to survive what the rest could not, and she keyed it shut from the inside, so that the lock would hold, even if the hand that keyed it did not. She was still labeling. That was the thing the record would remember when the record was finally read. In the last minutes, she was still writing on the drawers in her own hand, because a machine cannot love a thing, and someone someday would need to know what was inside. Halden's Reach went quiet at 11 minutes past the colony's morning. Tamarack Ko's officers logged it as a target neutralized. The central facility, the hardened depot, the probable military installation gone. 9,000 personnel. A message that could not be missed. It had been a seed vault. There had been no weapons on Halden's Reach. There had been drawers labeled by hand, and the people who tended them, and now there was neither except for one deep hold sealed from the inside, that the Concordat scans never found, because it was not built to be found. It was built to survive the fire. It survived. Tamarack Co. reviewed the strike report, and felt the arithmetic settle back into place, and did not yet know that it never would again. He waited for the human answer. This was the part he understood. You struck a soft target, and the enemy, seeing what you were willing to do, came to the table. Fear was efficient. It saved ships. He had told himself that many times, and it had always been true, and he waited now for it to be true again. The human answer came within the hour, and it was not fear, it was not rage either, which he could also have read. Rage. He had a number for a grieving species, lashes out, spends itself, throws whatever it has at you in the first hot hours, and a commander simply weathers that and lets it burn down to bargaining. Ko had braced for rage. What came instead was a message addressed this time to him by name, though he had never given the humans his name. It said, "We have logged your action at Halden's Reach. There were no weapons there. There were seeds. Then a place deep in Concordat space, coordinates precise to the straining decimal, and then beside them, the entry 2906, the same number as the first message, not the rising one, the first one. 2906 returned to him now, after Halden, as if to say this one. Remember this one. This is the one that matters now. There was no threat attached, no promise of retaliation, no demand. A correction of his intelligence delivered flatly the way you correct a child who has broken something and does not yet understand what. There were no weapons there. There were seeds, and then a place and a number, and the small final mark. Tamrock Co. had reduced 4 worlds to a chord. He had read the surrender messages of each of them, the pleas and the terms, and the careful, desperate arithmetic of the beaten. He had never in his life received a message like this one, and he understood, sitting alone on his command deck with the report of a burned colony beside a correction of his own facts, that he did not know what kind of thing he was fighting. He gave an order he had never given before. He told his fleet to hold position short of Earth and to touch nothing. It was in the days of holding that the first sliver came, and it came from a mistake his own fleet made, not from anything the humans said. One of his scout ships, pushed too far forward against orders by a captain hungry to find the hidden human fleet, met a single human vessel at the edge of a quiet system. The scout captain, frightened and eager, fired first. He destroyed the human ship. He reported it proudly, a kill proof at last, that the humans could bleed. The next day, at the same edge of the same quiet system, his instruments found 2 human vessels of the identical class, going about the identical quiet work the first had been doing, as if nothing at all had happened. Not a fleet come to avenge the loss, not a response. 2, where there had been one built or brought or simply produced in the time it took Co's fleet to log a single kill and feel briefly proud of it. The scout captain, who was not a stupid man, stopped feeling proud. Co studied the report a long time. 1 ship destroyed, 2 the next day unbothered. He turned it over, looking for the fleet behind it, the reserve, the hidden strength, and he could not find it. And slowly, he understood that he was looking for the wrong thing. There was no hidden fleet. That was not where the strength was. The strength was that it did not matter to them that he had destroyed a ship, because they could make another before he had finished being pleased about the first. He was not fighting a fleet. He was fighting a capacity, and a capacity does not have a number. You can be larger than. He thought of the rising entries, 2906, 11, 12, a list that was still being added to, and for the first time, he let himself wonder, in the privacy of his own dread, whether the list was a list of ships, and whether the number he could not read was the number of times the humans had chosen not to use them. He put the thought away. It was too large. But he did not delete it the way he had not deleted the first message, and it stayed open somewhere behind his eyes. And now and then, through the holding days, he found himself looking at it again. The intelligence officer came to him on the 5th day of holding, and he had not slept in longer than that, and his hands were not entirely steady. The coordinates, he said, the first ones, entry 2906. I have the clearance now. I know what the location is. Tell me, Tamarack Co. said. The officer told him. The coordinates the humans had sent in answer to a demand for the surrender of their entire species, resolved to a system deep inside Concordat space, not a human world, not a contested border, a Concordat system held under a designation so restricted that the officer had needed the Warspeaker's own authority to read it. It was Vailholm. Co knew the name, though few outside the high command did. Vailholm was not a colony and not a shipyard, or rather it was more than either. It was the muster, the forward armory, the place the Concordat gathered, the strength it did not wish, counted staged deep and quiet, the reserve behind the reserve, the number the Empire kept off its own charts, so that no enemy could ever be larger than it. The humans had sent him its coordinates, precise to the decimal, in answer to a threat before his fleet had even reached Earth, as if to say, without saying anything at all, "We know where you keep the thing you keep hidden. We have known for some time. It is entry 2,906. On a list we are still writing. Tamarack Ko sat with the name of his empire's most secret place, glowing on the screen beside the report of a colony he had burned for holding seeds, and he understood that the humans had not been bluffing and had never once been afraid, and that he had brought 600 ships 11 days to threaten a species that had answered his threat by handing him a map to his own hidden heart and drawing a small patient period at the end. He ordered the fleet to turn, not toward Earth, toward Valeholm. Valeholm was 3 days away at the speed Tamarack Ko now permitted himself, which was every speed his engines had. He did not care anymore what the humans read in his approach. He needed to see the place with his own instrument. He needed the number he could not read to become at last a thing he could count. He spent the 3 days telling himself what he would find. He would find Valeholm, as it had always been, the muster, the forward armory, thousands of hulls staged in the dark, the strength, the Concordat kept off its own charts, the reserve, behind the reserve. The humans had learned its location, yes. That was a failure of secrecy, a serious one, and someone would answer for it. But a location was not a fleet. Knowing where a thing is does not let you touch it. He would arrive, and he would find Valeholm whole and armed and terrible, and the entry number would resolve at last into what it had always been, a bluff, the oldest bluff there is, and the arithmetic would settle back into place and stay there. He believed almost none of this by the 3rd day. He said it to himself anyway, the way a man says the things that have always been true without looking to check whether they still were. The fleet came out of the dark above Valeholm, and the muster was there exactly where it should be. Thousands of hulls staged in the quiet, the whole hidden strength of the Concordat, arrayed in the black. Not one of them was live. It took Ko's officers an hour to be sure, and the hour was very quiet on the command deck. The ships were intact. That was the first strange thing. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing was scattered, or burned, or torn. The muster sat in perfect order, hull beside hull exactly as the Concordat had left it. But the reactors were cold. Every one powered down gently in sequence, the way you put out lamps in a house you are leaving for the night and mean to return to. The weapon systems were not damaged. They were disarmed, made safe deliberately by hands that had known precisely what each system was and precisely how to make it harmless, and had taken the time to do it correctly thousands of times over. Across the whole silent fleet, and there were no dead. That was the thing Ko's officers could not make sense of, and said aloud, and then said again. Valeholm had been crewed. Not fully it was a muster, and not a war fleet, but there had been personnel, thousands of them, keepers and technicians, and the small standing garrison that watched the Empire's hidden heart. They were all accounted for, all of them, alive, unharmed, gathered, without injury. Their records intact, their logs untouched, but for one addition. They had been secured, the way you secure something you have decided not to break. Whoever had come to Valeholm had held every life on it in their hand, thousands of them, the crews and the garrison and the keepers of the secret muster, and had set each one down again, unhurt. They had come to the most secret place in the Concordat. They had disarmed its entire hidden strength without firing a shot. They had held thousands of lives and taken none of them, and then they had gone, leaving the ships cold and safe and whole. And one thing more, on every darkened console, on every disarmed weapon station, on the sealed door of the garrison, where the crews had been secured, unharmed, there was the same small mark, not a threat, not a boast. A single entry written in the human hand, plain and patient. Entry 2,906. Tamarack Ko stood on his command deck and looked at the cold and perfect muster of his empire, the strength that was to have made Earth kneel, sitting disarmed in the dark with a number written on it, and he finally understood what the humans had sent him on the day he set out to threaten their world. They had not sent him a bluff. They had not sent him a boast. They had sent him a receipt. His intelligence officer spoke into the quiet. His voice had gone somewhere past fear, into the flat place beyond it. Warspeaker. The number 2,906. He stopped. He made himself continue. It is not a count of ships. I do not think it ever was. I think it is a count of places. Places like this one. Places we keep hidden. And I think this one is entry 2906, because 2905 others come before it on the list. The command deck was very quiet. They have been to Valeholm, Co. said. It was not a question. He was only saying it aloud, to make it real. The way you say the worst thing flatly, because there is no other way to hold it. They have been to Valeholm, and they left it standing. They found the thing we hide behind everything, and they turned off its lamps, and they did not harm a single one of my people. And they wrote a number on it, and the number was low. Yes, Warspeaker. 2906. Co heard his own voice from a small distance. Out of a list they are still adding to, 12 since we left Earth. Places like this, and they have not touched one of them. They have only counted them, and turned off their lamps, and gone home. He thought of Halden's Reach, the soft target, the hardened depot that had been a vault of seeds. He had crossed 11 days to threaten this species, and in his first true act of force, he had burned a house full of grain, and the woman who kept it because his instruments had called it military, and he had wanted a number he could read. And they had answered by handing him back his own hidden empire, disarmed and unharmed, and marked entry 2906, and had killed no one at all. He had come to teach them the shape of what he was willing to do. They had shown him the shape of what they had chosen so far, not to. A channel opened on the command deck. It was not from the Concordat. It carried the flat patient signature Co. had come to know across 11 days and 3 worlds. And when the voice came, it was quiet and unhurried and not tall in any way. And it was the most frightening thing he had ever heard. Warspeaker Tamarack Co. said, Commander Ada Reyes, you saying Valholm now? Good. Then we can talk. Tamarack Co. had imagined on the 11-day crossing what the human commander would look like when at last she came to terms. He had built the picture without meaning to the way you do. Someone who filled a screen, someone whose voice you had to lean away from. He had beaten 4 worlds, and the ones who spoke for them at the end had all, in their different ways, been large in the moment, because the moment was large, and it pulled largeness out of people. Ada Reyes filled nothing. She sat in an ordinary chair in an ordinary room, and behind her, a mug of something sat going cold at the edge of a console, and she looked at him with the patience of a person who has already waited a long time and can wait a little more. You corrected my intelligence, Co said. He had meant to say something else, something that held the position. But this was what came. At Halden's Reach. You told me there were seeds there. There were seeds there, Reyes said. There were 9,000 people who kept them. One of them sealed the deep archive before the end. Her name was Priya Okonkwo. She was still labeling the drawers when your ships arrived, so that whoever opened them in 100 years would know what they were holding. She said it, without heat. She said it. The way you read a name off a list, you have read many times. You called it a hardened depot. I want you to understand that we know exactly what it was, and exactly what you called it, and exactly what the difference is. We keep very careful records too. The number Co said, 2906. My officer believes it counts places. Places like Valeholm. Your officer is good at his work. Reyes did not smile. It counts places like Valeholm. The muster you keep off your charts, so no enemy can ever be larger than you. You have a great many of them. We found the first one, a long time ago, by accident. The way we find most things. And then we went looking for the rest, not to burn them, to count them, to know where you kept the thing you would reach for. If the numbers ever went against you, she let that settle. We have been counting for a long time. Warspeaker, 2906, is not near the end of the list. It is only the one we chose to show you first, because it was the one you brought your certainty from. Co looked at the cold and perfect muster in his forward screen, the Empire's hidden heart with its lamps turned off and a low number written on it, and he made himself ask the question that a commander asks the question the whole encounter had been arranged. He now saw to make him ask, how many ships do you have? Reyes was quiet for a moment, not calculating, deciding how much truth a man could hold. That's the wrong question, she said. You've been asking it since you left Earth, and it's why none of this has made sense to you. You keep looking for a fleet large enough to be afraid of. There isn't one, there doesn't need to be one. She leaned forward slightly, and it was not a threat, and that was what made it terrible. You destroyed one of our ships at the edge of a quiet system. The next day there were two that frightened your scout captain more than a battle would have, and he was right to be frightened, and he did not even understand what he was looking at. You cannot outnumber a thing that builds faster than you can subtract. The number of ships we have is not the number that matters. The number that matters is how fast the number changes, and in which direction, and whether the people building them ever get tired. Our don't. We learned not to, a long time ago, in a school you have never had to attend. Valholm Co. said slowly. You could have burned it. The muster. Thousands of hulls. You held every life on it. You could have ended the Concordat's hidden strength in a single night, and no one would ever have known where the fire came from. Yes. Why didn't you? And here Ada Reyes did the thing that Tamarack Co. would carry for the rest of his life, longer than the memory of any battle, because it was not a battle. And that was the whole of it. You demanded our surrender, she said. You sent us a threat, and a deadline, and a list of what you would do to us if we did not kneel, and we sent you back a set of coordinates. You thought it was a bluff. Your arbiter said we had no answer for you, and she was almost right. We had no answer of the kind she meant. We had this one instead. She gestured faintly at nothing at all of it. We sent you a map of the places we chose not to burn. You sent us a demand. We sent you a map. Those are not the same message, Warspeaker, and I need you to understand that they are not, because your council does not yet. And someone on your side of this has to. Co said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not be smaller than the silence. Halden's Reach chose to kill our seed keepers, Reyes said. And now at last, there was something under the flatness, something old and level and immovable. We chose to let your garrison at Valholm go home to theirs. You will want to believe. Those are two moves in the same game. They are not. One of them is what you do. The other is what we choose. And the entire distance between your empire and its end runs through that difference which you have spent 11 days failing to see. She sat back. The mug at the edge of the console had gone entirely cold. She did not touch it. Take the receipt to your council, she said. Entry 2906. Tell them where you found it and what you found beside it, which was no one dead. And tell them the list is longer than that, and we are still writing it, and that this is the answer they said we did not have. She reached to close the channel. They'll want a number the same as you did. Give them this one, 2906, and counting. That's the only number that was ever going to frighten them, and it isn't a fleet. The channel closed. Tamarack Co. sat a long while on his command deck, above the cold and unharmed muster of everything his empire had hidden, holding a number he could finally read, and wishing more than he had ever wished for anything, that he still could not. Then he turned his fleet for home to carry the receipt to the High Council, and to find out whether they could hear a warning any better than they had the first time. Tamarack Co. came before the High Council 11 days later, and he brought the receipt with him, and he set it before them the way you set down a thing that is heavier than it looks. The chamber was as it had been. The tiers, the arbiters, the admirals, High Arbiter Selvoth at the center, with certainty sitting on her like armor. They had expected a victory report, a world brought to accord the 41st, the number spoken, and the number obeyed. What they got instead was a Warspeaker who had left with 600 ships and returned with all of them having taken not one world and lost not one hull, which was a shape the records had no entry for, and the not knowing made the chamber restless. Before he had said a word, he told them plainly. He was a man who believed in numbers, and he gave them the numbers, in order because the numbers were the only way to carry the thing, 600 ships to Earth. No defending fleet, because there had never been going to be a defending fleet. A rising count of entries, sent unbidden each one a place inside Concordat space that the humans had reached and named. A strike on Halden's Reach, a hardened depot that had been a vault of seeds, a single human ship destroyed at the edge of a quiet system, and two in its place, the next day unbothered. And then Valholm. He told them about Valholm slowly, because it was the part they would least want to hold. The muster found exactly where it should be. Thousands of hulls whole and intact. Every reactor cold, every weapon disarmed, every life aboard the crews and the keepers, and the standing garrison of the Empire's most secret place, alive and unharmed, and set down gently thousands of them by hands that had held each one and chosen to let it go. And on every darkened console the same small mark, entry 2906. Out of a list the humans were still writing. They found Veilholm, an old admiral said, and his voice was not steady. They found Veilholm, and they left it standing. They found all of them, Ko said. Veilholm is entry 2906. There are 2905 before it, and I do not know how many after, and neither do they, because they are still counting. Every muster we hide, every reserve we keep off our own charts, so that no enemy can be larger than us. They have walked through the whole of it for years, quietly, and touched nothing, and written a number on each one, and gone home. Selvoth had not moved. The armor of her certainty held the way armor holds right up until the single blow that finds the seam. A location, she said, is not a fleet. Knowing where a thing is does not let you touch it. They have shown us they can find our musters. They have not shown us they can take them. They took Veilholm without firing a shot. Ko said, they disarmed it and left it whole. They were not showing us they can find our hidden strength. High Arbiter, they were showing us they have already been inside it thousands of times and chosen every single time to do nothing. That is not a bluff. A bluff is a thing you cannot do, pretending it can. This is a thing they can do folded around a decision, not to. They have no answer for this, Selvoth said. She said it the way she had said it in this chamber, before he ever left the comfortable thing, the thing that had always been true. But she said it into a room that had just heard about Veilholm, and the room did not agree with her the way it once had. No one took it up. No one echoed it. The words went out from her and found nothing to land on, and came back changed. And for the first time in the long history of her saying it, High Arbiter Selvoth heard how empty it was in the silence where the agreement used to be. They have no answer for this. She had built an empire on the certainty of it, and the answer had been sitting in her charts for years at coordinates she had never thought to check, written in a patient hand entry after entry 2900, and counting. It was Vosh Kar who broke the silence, the old archivist, the dry reed among blades who had stood in this same chamber before the fleet ever left and been laughed off. He did not sound triumphant. There is no triumph in being right about a thing like this. I told you, he said quietly, that we had never once seen them frightened. And you told me that was because they had never met us? I said it might be because they had already survived the thing that would frighten them, and had nothing left to fear from us. He looked at Selvoth, and then at the whole tiered chamber at the admirals, and the arbiters, and the certainty, leaking out of all of them at once. I have spent 300 years reading the records of species that refused to kneel. I know the shape of the ones we broke. I have been trying this whole while to tell you why this one felt wrong, and I did not have the words until Veilholm gave them to me. He stood the way he had stood before an old man among people who this time were listening. A species that has survived every attempt to erase it stops counting its strength in fleets. It counts in patience. It builds faster than you can subtract, and it learns faster than you can adapt, and it does not get tired, because tiredness was the first thing it had to bury to still be here. And a species like that is very hard to frighten, because you have nothing to threaten it with that it has not already lived through and outlasted. We sent them a threat. We should have sent them an apology, and hoped they were in a mood to accept one. No one contradicted him. The chamber that had laughed him off now had no laughter in it at all. Far from the chamber on a world that no longer existed as a world, the deep hold at the heart of what had been Halden's reach opened at last, keyed from the outside by a human recovery team that had come, as the humans always came, quietly and late, and for the purpose of counting what was still there. They found the core archive intact, the oldest copies the seeds 100 worlds had sent to Halden, precisely because Halden was quiet and far, and no one would think to burn it. Row upon row climate held whole, and they found the drawers labeled in a careful hand, All of them, every one, because the keeper had gone on labeling them to the last minutes, so that whoever opened the hold in 100 years would know what they were holding. Her name had been Priya Okonkwo. She had been 47. She had a husband named Daniel and 2 children who had argued at the breakfast table on the last ordinary morning, and she had kept the Halden vault for 19 years. And she had written the labels by hand because a machine cannot love a thing, and the seeds had needed loving as much as they had needed cold. There was a nursery among the human worlds now quiet and far, where the Halden archive had been carried and opened, and drawer by drawer planted grain from 100 lost places, fruit that grew nowhere anymore. It came up in long green rows under a pale sun, the whole inheritance of a people who had learned a long time ago that the way you keep a thing forever is to make many quiet copies of it and hide them where the fire will not reach. The drawers emptied of seed were kept, no one threw them away. They were kept because of the hand that had labeled them, still legible, still careful, in the last minutes of the last ordinary morning. That was the answer the Concordat had said. They did not have, not a fleet, a green row coming up under a pale sun from seeds. A woman had died sealing into the dark so that the fire would not reach them. You cannot threaten a species that already knows how to survive being erased, because it has already decided at the root in the labeled drawers and the deep holds and the many quiet copies that it will not be, it only has to outlast you. And it is very good at outlasting. The High Council withdrew the ultimatum to Earth. There was no vote of surrender, because the humans had asked for none. There was no accord, because the humans did not want a world. They had a great many worlds, and had never once had to boast of the number. There was only a message sent back at last from Earth to the Concordat, in answer to the withdrawal, and it was short, in the way the humans were always short. It said that the counting would continue, not as a threat, as a fact, the way the tide is a fact. The musters would go on being found and named, and left standing entry after entry, and the number would go on rising, and the Concordat was welcome to check any coordinate on the list, and find its lamps turned off, and its people unharmed, and a patient mark on the console, for as long as the Concordat cared to keep hiding things from a species that had already looked behind everything, and chosen so far to do nothing about it. So far, that was the whole of the piece. It ran through those 2 words, the way a river runs through a country, and everyone on the council understood now that the 2 words were not a comfort. They were a leash they had put on themselves the day they sent the threat, and the humans had simply picked up the other end gently and would hold it patiently and would go on writing the number. That was the only number that had ever been able to frighten an empire. 2,906. And counting. Warspeaker Tamarack Co. was not punished for Valeholm, because there was no one left in the high command with the certainty required to punish him. He had gone out to bring a world to accord, and come back, having lost nothing and taken nothing, and the records had no entry for that shape. And in the end, they simply let him keep his rank, and his ships, and the thing he had brought home that was heavier than either. He did not command another campaign. He asked for a quiet posting, and they gave it to him, a patrol of the Empire's own charts, the long, dull rounds of a fleet with nowhere it needed to be. It suited him. He had spent his life believing in numbers, in the arithmetic of fear and force, applied correctly at the right time, in the right amount. He believed in it still. He had only learned late, and at a cost, that there was a kind of strength the arithmetic could not hold, and that he had spent 11 days steering 600 ships straight into it because it had not fit in any column. He knew how to keep. Sometimes on the long rounds, he took his fleet through a system that held one of the musters. He never announced it. He would simply arrive quietly, the way he had learned quiet from the ones who had taught it to him, and he would find the muster where it should be, and he would check, and the lamps would be off. Every time, reactors, cold weapons made safe, the crews gone home unharmed, and on the darkened console in the patient human hand, an entry, a different number each time, higher always than the last time he had looked. The list was still being written. He had known it would be. He checked. Anyway, the way you check a thing to keep it real, and each time he found the number risen, he felt the same thing, which was not fear anymore, exactly. It was closer to the feeling of standing in a very old place and understanding in your body how long it had been there before you came and how long it would be there after you were gone. He never sent word of it to the council. They knew there was nothing to add. The number rose, and the peace held, and the 2 words held it so far, and everyone who mattered had finally learned to read them. On Earth, in the room where a woman had once said, "Start the clock," the clock was still running. It was not a countdown. It had never been a countdown. Ada Reyes came into the room in the ordinary early hours, the way she had come into it 1,000 times, and the young man who had touched the console on the first day was there again, older, now, with a mug going cold at his elbow, because it was always going cold, because there was always one more thing to log before you got to drink it. She poured herself something warm and did not drink it either. She sat down at the console where the count was kept, the running number that the Concordat had once mistaken for a code, and then for a threat, and then at last, and correctly for a receipt. She read the newest entries. Another muster found, another set of lamps turned off, another garrison sent home to sleep in its own beds, unaware for the rest of its life. How close it had come to a fire that never fell. She added the day's line to the log. She wrote it by hand. She had picked up the habit years ago from a keeper on a colony called Halden's Reach, a woman she had never met, whose drawers were labeled in a hand that a recovery team had found still legible in the dark. Reyes had read about the labels. Everyone in the room had. It had changed the way they kept the count, though none of them had ever said so aloud. You wrote it by hand now, because a machine cannot love a thing, and the count needed to be kept by someone who understood what it was for. What it was for was not fear. That was the part the Concordat had never quite been able to hold, even at the end. The number was not kept to frighten anyone. It was kept the way Priya Okonkwo had kept her seeds. It was a quiet copy of the truth, made carefully stored, where the fire could not reach it, so that if the certainty ever came again from the Concordat, or from whatever came after the Concordat, there would already be an answer waiting patient and complete, labeled in a legible hand. Reyes finished the line. She capped the pen. It was an old pen, a plain one, the kind of thing a person carries for years without thinking about it. She set it down beside the console, in the same place. She always set it, and she looked for a moment at the running number, and then she got up, because the count did not need watching, only keeping, and there was other work, and the coffee had gone cold again anyway. Far away, under a pale sun, the Halden archive was coming up in long green rows. It had been planted drawer by drawer, seed by seed, on a quiet world, far from any border, by people who had never met the woman who saved it, and did not need to have met her to finish what she started. Grain from 100 lost places, fruit that grew nowhere anymore. It stood in the light, ordinary and green, and entirely alive, the whole inheritance of a species that had learned a long time ago in a school no empire had ever had to attend, that the way you keep a thing forever is to make many quiet copies of it and hide them where the fire cannot reach. The empty drawers were kept in a cool, dry room at the edge of the nursery. No one had thrown them away. They sat in their long rows, labeled in a careful hand, waiting the way the seeds had once waited for 100 years to pass, and someone to open them and know exactly what they had been holding. Empires do not end the way a wall falls. They end the way a held breath ends all at once, and very quiet. And often the empire is the last to know. It has already let the breath go. The Concordat did not fall. It was not burned or broken or brought to a court. It simply learned late, and at the cost of a colony of farmers, that it had spent its whole long history counting the wrong thing, and that somewhere a patient hand was keeping the right count, and would go on keeping it, and had never once needed the number to be large. It only needed it to be true. 2906. On the day a Warspeaker first read it. Higher now, higher tomorrow, and a green row coming up under a pale sun from seeds. A woman sealed into the dark with her own hand still labeling in the last minutes, so that the fire would not reach them. It didn't